Yeah. So what is consciousness? You know, there's a lot of different theories on how the human person exists within the three-dimensional domain. And we have those that are believing of free will and those that are not. I think a lot of our judgments that you can sort of passively see people making as they're maneuvering throughout their daily lives of other people and places and experiences are often based on this sort of what I would conclude is an assumption that the concept of free will doesn't exist. And why would I start a conversation about consciousness while also immediately mentioning free will? I think it's because, as many theologians have identified throughout the millennia, this is sort of the central pivotal piece to determining what it is you will believe about your reality. So without trying to make this recording religious necessarily in its context, I would like to address consciousness from the perspective of free will being an imperative. I think free will is identifiable. Do we have an absolute proof of free will? Not necessarily, but there are theologians that have given pretty good examples about how it would work. There are a couple of different breaking points, so I'm not going to spend this entire video going into free will. I would need, on that level, I would need all my notes, and I'd have to review it thoroughly before trying to break those points down. And that's not really the point of the video. So let's, that aside, let's kind of step forward a little bit here. Free will in this context, as I'm describing it, is the ability to freely make decisions within the space that do propel somebody in a slightly different direction than what they freely could have chosen otherwise. And that's really just the basic concept of free will, massively condensed without trying to frame it with any other works at all. We're just freely willing to do and able to do what it is we actually want to do whenever we want to do it, without needing to follow some predefined script. This could be something as minimal as I move my hand to the right a little bit instead of moving it to the left, right? Or maybe I move it to the right, 2 degrees more than I would have otherwise moved it in some other version of my existence. The point about addressing this before I get started on what consciousness is because I think if you don't believe in free will, it's almost pointless to have a conversation about consciousness because you wouldn't be able to freely do anything consciously, right? Consciousness basically is in and of itself the concept of, let me step back here so I don't get too lost in my thoughts. How do I describe this for you guys? And then I'll get to the point of why I wanted to make this video. It's the ability to control one's actions, move towards a desired result, and to do so while being aware of one's surroundings. So consciousness is basically the word we're using for awareness. It's like the global term, though, which I think can be easily forgotten, because there are many different stages of consciousness. Um, my galaxy brain falls asleep so often, so please forgive me for that. Um, that's something we're still working on right now. I'm trying to find some supplements or some sort of something to keep me from falling asleep while I'm in the middle of trying to explain something. Um, but it's basically a global operative term for defining some kind of state that uh, any type of entity or somewhat, again, or some type of object is accomplishing. So, again, it could be a plant or something that's not necessarily otherwise known as being sentient to any degree, because consciousness could be one form, one state, one ability, whereas some entities house multiple states of consciousness, right? And then the more states of consciousness that you're actually utilizing, because consciousness is the ability of awareness in and of itself. That is the construct. The more of those that you have access to, um, it's almost like how do you say, like a looping effect, right? They start to loop on each other, and then that's basically where we get like sentience from. So humans are like kind of a sentient being. We don't know how high up in the chain we are, but it's because we have multiple levels of consciousness. So I think let's lay out the point of what I want to talk about today. Um, the real objective that I want to make with this video, though I was a little hesitant to even sit down and record this video, uh, is I want to kind of, how do you say, describe or address something that is probably going under the table by a lot of the general population. In psychiatry, we're often just like, or in the field of psychiatry or the realm of psychiatry, distributing, let's focus it down a little bit further. I'm not just talking about like the study, but the actual application of psychiatry, giving people psych meds, right? In that space, because this has been very relevant for me recently, there is a strong assumption that is often executed in the end state with a doctor working with a patient that select ABC resolves D, right? Or whatever. And this is not absolutely true. There are not just like symptom effects that occur when a person takes a medication for a long time. There are not just like standard everyday things that we can, document, and then that's probably going to end up being something they experience. There are also abnormal outcomes, right? Outliers, as they would otherwise be known. And with our limited understanding of the human brain, it is the case that sometimes we end up breaking into some outliers. So let me tell you why this is such a big deal for me right now, and why I wanted to talk about this, because this has really affected me recently. So this is not a sympathy video. I'm not trying to get attention for this. There's some risk here in addressing this subject. There's a lot of assumption in this field right now. And again, like I said, there's so much about the human brain we don't know, that we don't even know all the things we're doing or the outcomes that we can generate when we're doing what we're doing. Again, I know that this is a religious thing, but there's a lot of things we're playing with in this conversation, so please bear with me as I go forward in trying to describe this, because we have to take into account that there are a lot of people who have already mentioned that we're playing God and that it's kind of dangerous. Not all the outcomes are bad, so I'm going to temper this a little bit. The outcome that I'm experiencing is not necessarily bad. But this video is basically a reflection of what has basically occurred to me when getting off of a medication. And I'm going to upfront just say right now that I don't think it's psychosis, which is why I started this conversation, and I'm going to be titling it something about consciousness, right? Okay, so let me give you a little background, and then where we're at right now. So basically, I might as well just give you my story, and then if people want to run with it, they can. It doesn't really matter. Like when I was 15 years old, I got, well, actually, let's go back further. When I was about 3, I fell out of a shopping cart. My mom was trying to get something off the top of the shelf at a King Soopers. We were living up in the mountains in Colorado, and she couldn't reach it. And my sister and I were, there shopping with her. My sister was like, "I'm gonna get this thing," because she's taller. She's older than me. She's taller. I'm in the shopping cart, and she jumps up on the back of the shopping cart. Well, we both go for it, obviously, at the time, because I'm a child. And she pushed the shopping cart while I was standing up, and then pulled it backwards, because she had just jumped onto the thing. And this caused, momentum for me to go forward and then to go back and then forward again. Really abruptly. Threw me over the top of the shopping cart. I fell on the actual top of my head, and I damaged my head, and I blacked out. And 45, 50 minutes later, something like that, I ended up in a hospital. And, dazed for multiple days. I didn't really know what was going on. I have a permanent deformity on the top of my head. So that's kind of where all this stuff started. I think that permanently affected my consciousness, right? As a lot of things do, head injuries. Like, we have these generally identifiable things about conscious states of awareness that that we've generally identified. This video is me addressing one that I don't think we know anything about. So if you skip without a lot of detail, you go into high school. We've had a couple moves. There's been a lot of things that have gone down, divorces and other stuff. I can get into it more if someone wants all the details another time, but I get in a fist fight for something that was basically my fault. And I got beat over the back of the head pretty severely, repeatedly, probably 200-300 times. Again, I go home, I have a piercing headache, my head is clearly not okay. The fact that I am not, passed out, blacked out, in a hospital is phenomenal. I don't know how I survived that, honestly. The level of damage that my brain was taking was severe, as far as I can tell, right? Later, I did get it scanned, and they said I didn't have brain damage. But I was getting hit by someone that had training in UFC, and I was not getting hit lightly. So, the very next day after that, I started hallucinating. I had never had really any, hallucinations before that. But I did have memory problems as a child. Um, Eventually, this was diagnosed as schizophrenia, and I took a medication that people are familiar with, quetiapine, for a really long time. Uh, I'm almost 31 now. I've taken it for half of my life. And that medicine is supposed to help you sleep. That was the biggest problem that I had, was this like breakdown in sleep and processing of my environment, and then occasionally, hallucinations. But for me, most of it was around sleep. It was hypnagogic, it was hypnopompic hallucinations, before and after sleep and all that stuff. It was nightmares. It was lack of quality of sleep, that kind of stuff. And it did work, because I went through psychosis after that second head injury for like probably 5 years. That those primary symptoms I just mentioned were really bad for a long time, and that was some kind of changed state of consciousness. Um, you know, there's a lot of talk about how people become shamans, and I've often thought like that was sort of my initiation, right? I've never, I'm not a part of any kind of like group or anything. I don't do cults and I don't do none of that shit. But it was something to that effect, right? It kind of fit the bill, right? It was a near death sort of repeating thing. I did stabilize on quetiapine, and I think it had a lot of benefits, but it was some years after that I determined, in my early 20s, that I didn't think I really needed to take it anymore. I was going to college and I was like, man, what's the point of this? Like, I think I've already accomplished it, what I needed to accomplish. But, everybody says when you take psych meds, especially for schizophrenia, that you just can't stop. Like, you're supposed to take that for your whole life. It just is that way, and it's the only way to keep you stable. So once you're stable, they really don't want to get you off of it, because stabilizing you is the biggest battle in and of itself. Why would you stop taking something that works is the general concept. But like I mentioned before, you get all these damaging effects, and those symptoms can be really debilitating. Um, I've had what I believe is uh, damage to my pancreas, to my gut, um, uh, pseudo, ED effects. I've had, you get gynecomastia, you get, which mine isn't really that bad, but you get that. Um, it messes up your sleep cycle because it messes with your REM 3. Um, so it sort of in the long run makes your sleep pattern worse, which can cause damage to your brain, because if you're not getting adequate sleep, that messes with your brain. Um, and a whole host of other things. Like if I sat here and tried to think about it at, 7 in the morning, it's like I'm doing now. It would take me forever to describe the amount of things that thing does that they're claiming it doesn't do. Uh, Getting off of it made me intimately aware. So this is where this whole thing comes in. When you get off of a psych med, you're supposed to go pretty slow. And for me, I had tried it a couple of times prior, and it didn't work most of those times, because a lot of doctors are just like, forget it. It doesn't matter. Like if you're getting off of it and you're already at the bottom minimum dose already, just go, right? So they would try to get me to go 50 or 100 milligrams at a time, and doing so would cause me to relapse, and then I'm not sleeping, and you go through this whole decompensation cycle. So I did a ton of research, and the entire time I was taking these meds and stuff, ever since I was 15, I've been, researching it, because it impacted my perception of what free will even is, right? Because as a young person, I was already experiencing extreme states of consciousness that the people around me just simply did not have any context for. And so you get blamed for these states of consciousness because, as many of you are probably aware, the target audience of this video, you're experiencing things that supposedly the general population is not experiencing at all, and also doesn't have, again, the context for. So the reason I thought of this video was because I was in a conference yesterday and the day prior, for my work that this new job that I'm at, and they were talking about the human brain and like mostly the threat cycle, you know, freeze, flight, or fight kind of thing. And I've been having a lot of symptoms as I was going off the medicine and still after being off of it. And it kind of sparked that thought, right? Like, as I'm observing these people talking about this stuff on stage, I'm observing their lack of awareness, right? Their lack of consciousness of what it is that they think they're talking about. Because there's not a intimate understanding with the subject matter. There's just a like passive, how do you say, like learning. I wouldn't really call it learning though. It's like an adaptive genetic assumption. Like they're carrying along a collective assumption about some, like a hyper generalization of how the thing works. The conference wasn't as detailed or like scientific based, or they weren't teaching us. We weren't going to sit there and like, it wasn't a college class. It was just kind of an overview, because there were people from all over the state that had to learn, and they're all at different parts of their career or whatever. So some of us are brand new, and some of us are not. And it's kind of like a year and reflect kind of connect thing. So I think they made it pretty general. But I was observing a lot of the speakers, because we did like big stage stuff, and then we did like little rooms and stuff. And I was observing a lot of speakers, and I was just kind of seeing that even in the field that I'm working in, which I can't talk a lot about, there's a severe lack of consciousness or awareness of the actual lived experience of the people that we're working with. And it really got me thinking about why that is. It's sort of like you can know the book knowledge, or you can think you do, but you don't though. Like, you don't know the actual thing. Like street knowledge versus book knowledge, etc. So my brain has been exhausted, as you can probably tell, me trying to get to the point in this video, coming off this medicine. And I want to put this video out there to sort of get people talking about what can happen to someone when you do. I came off the quetiapine a little over a month month and a half. It's like around a month and a half ago. I've been fully off, I think. It's been about a month and a half. Maybe a little more than that. And on my way down, there was about 3 months where I was basically rebounding. And don't take this as fact. Follow your doctor or whatever. I'm not telling anybody what to do. Again, I am not telling anybody what to do. I'm not a doctor. But as I was coming down, I kind of rebounded. I had a lot of psych symptoms, but I was following a lot of the research that I've done over the years, and I had, for other reasons, taken estradiol and things. But part of the reason for doing that was to insulate my brain. Before I do this, I was trying to do a gender transition at one point, but I didn't commit to it fully. And whenever I got off of that and then decided, you know what, I am just going to get off of this medicine and we'll see what happens, I knew that that was like a secondary benefit of it, and that was why I attempted things in a certain order that I did. And it worked. I followed a bunch of methods and things that I had learned online of theories of what people had said could possibly happen, and it worked. We went at a pace that was more steady, with smaller drops, and there was like an interval process in there, and like if something didn't work, I could kind of go back up. And instead of making those big jumps, we were able to drag it out longer and get it to the point where I was able to get off. I'm sleeping better. I've lost 40 pounds. I look better. I feel better. I actually have the ability to naturally fall asleep now, so I can actually get tired, which since I've taken this stuff for half of my life, I never had the ability to do before. I just didn't remember that experience, part of the human experience at all, because for half of my life I didn't know what it was like to endogenously feel like you need to sleep. Because this medication had completely destroyed my circadian rhythm cycle to the point where I didn't have that state of consciousness at all anymore. It was completely gone. So I could stay up for long periods of time and not really notice the effects until I'm so actually exhausted that my body is telling me I have to go down now. But the perceived state of consciousness of knowing that I'm getting tired was gone, which made me perceive reality as though I just had endless amounts of energy and I didn't need to sleep. Even though my physical observable nature was would be decompensating if I stayed up too long, you know, part of my consciousness was gone, right? It was actually gone. It was turned off. And so this isn't necessarily a PSA, but this video is kind of me just reflecting and addressing the fact that these psych meds are not really a good solution. I think that what I've learned from this is I'm way better off without that shit. And that I think society has gone in a direction where we think we can control consciousness like that and we can somehow, quote unquote, fix people's problems. But I think what we're going to learn in the long run is, are these problems that even needed to be fixed? Because if people are perceiving states of consciousness that other people aren't perceiving, we shouldn't be asking, how can we make them fit into the conscious state of awareness or collective state of consciousnesses that the quote-unquote normal population is experiencing. I think we need to be asking, how can everybody else figure out how to access those states of consciousness that we're not experiencing, and how can we understand them better? Turning them off is not the solution. We need to find out what they're doing. So through this process, what it really made me see was that the human brain is basically like a car. It has a bunch of different parts, but it's like an automated car, and it's moving through reality with a horn, and maybe you got like you're an antenna of sorts, right? And you're kind of just like driving through space. You're driving through space as though you're built into the space, and you were always supposed to be built into the space. And all your car really does is relay to you where in that space you are and what you can do from that current position in space with your current set of states of consciousness. So there's probably a background layer that collectively organizes states of consciousness that are not currently online. And the reason I'm saying this is because whenever something's turned off, that's all it really is, like a light switch is turned off. Because the second I get my meds, taken away or I get off of them, it comes back, right? Like I learn how to sleep again and then it's fine, right? Because that's sort of like the consciousness as the collective consciousness or the actual consciousness of this universe that we're living in is really outside of us. It's like superpositional, and I'm going to get into this more. It's something that actually exists at like the meshing layer of reality and doesn't have anything to do with our material bodies, right? So if we think about medication as something that sort of stops, and we've observed this, which is why we use them, it sort of stops and starts states, or it sort of blocks states temporarily, or it modifies pathways so that signals don't go certain directions and maybe they just keep going other directions or something to that effect. The universe somehow seems to be doing that for us. And people are wondering, like, were humans smarter in the past? Because there's theories about like how certain technologies were implemented to, build pyramids and stuff like that. Or like, are we getting smarter? Because maybe our awareness of the ability to tweak the human brain this way is some kind of development because it's a reflection of what the universe does for us. But it doesn't necessarily mean that we're getting smarter because as far as I can tell, we're still doing it in the opposite direction. Because if we were really actually doing the right thing, we would be turning more states of consciousness on instead of off. Right? Well, here's where the kicker comes in. Sometimes when you get off medicines, you kind of break your brain. Or you repair it. And you unlock new states of consciousness. People have done this on psychedelics where they took psychedelics or something to that effect. And then they got off. And then they just kind of realized later down the road, oh shit, I somehow now have some ability that I never had prior. What the hell happened? And it's fascinating to me because that's essentially what's happened to me. The really sad part of psychiatry as I see it now is there's so much stigma that psychiatry is supposed and psychology is supposed to be fixing, but it's actually propagating. Because you're labeling somebody, then you're giving them a medicine, so that's the solution. And then when they want to get off of it, if something happens to them, you're saying, "Oh, well, it was just because you had the disorder before." So it's like a catch-all, and it's totally chalked because an outside body is basically dictating your concept of reality and exactly what it is you're experiencing. So I'm just throwing all that shit out the window and making this video, okay? Because it's bullshit. It's crap, okay? And I just want people to understand that it's total crap. So if you are, let me give you an example. If you're experiencing like hypnagogia and hypnopompia, that's not schizophrenia, okay? That's a sleep disorder. Let me tell people once and for all, and I'm going to be frank about this, what schizophrenia actually is. It's a daytime version of narcolepsy, okay? And that's all you need to know. It's not the same thing as narcolepsy in the sense that you're not falling asleep, but your brain's doing it while you're consciously still awake because you're still hyper aroused. So your body, I've never met a person that had schizophrenia that didn't also have PTSD. And that's like, I don't know if anybody is really doing research in that, like actively. It's a problem. Uh, Schizophrenia is so obviously a progressed state of PTSD that if you actually look at it long enough, it's like it explains itself in itself, right? And I just want people to understand that in my experience, PTSD got so bad to the point where my brain basically just snapped. And that was when, and I also had the head injury. And that was when my brain snapped. And then I was hallucinating. But for me, those daytime hallucinations kind of like, they copped out after a while. And it became mostly the nighttime stuff. Uh, the thing about the brain is when something breaks or changes, like a lot of the collective organization of the rest of the brain changes. So there are, what your reality really is almost never just a perception of one type of consciousness that is a part of that collection, right? It's usually the actual collective nature of all those consciousness states that is your perception. And this is what I think people need to really focus on, is that you can change a lot of the functional layering of those individual states, remove or add more states or whatever based on the kind of work that you're doing with your mind. And that collective organization of whatever that amount of states is really the actual lived experience. So if you do enough shadow work like I was doing, and you change your neurochemistry dramatically, and you eat a better diet, which I was doing, and you get up at different times, and you focus more on your sleep, and you do all these things, you're now living a different conscious reality. And you can change so much to the point where you actually change that collective conscious organization. And now you're not even living the same life. That's what I basically did. I got off this medicine so fast, and I went through all the stages of the things that I had experienced, which led me to getting on it, which they say is going to cause you to decompensate, and then, oh, you're never coming back from that, or you're going to start hallucinating again, and then hallucinations are the result of brain damage, and then you're just going to relapse, and it's going to make your schizophrenia worse, and then the medicine's going to be less effective, but we're going to try to put you back on it, then you're going to need a higher dose, and these are all the things they say. And as long as you're not experiencing those exact same things forever, right? Or they're not tolerable, I would say, if your doctor's okay with it, keep trying. And this is just advice, but it's not actual advice. It's because it's like, remember, refer to your doctor. But because in my experience, the brain is insulated on its way down, and it's always reorganizing itself. It's self-actualizing and reorganizing itself. It's designed to repair itself, just like the rest of the body is. So as long as you do it safely, and it doesn't fully break, and you don't die in the process, when you get off of this shit, it's going to just start repairing all of the actual core problems that occurred before you got on it, right? But it is going to leave you with a different state of consciousness than what you had before. So my analysis of all the things I've been collecting of the different states of consciousness that I've experienced on different dosages, different meds, eating different foods, existing in different environments, like the amount of stuff that I've gone through, I recorded all that shit in my brain for 15 years. And then I get off this medicine, I'm going through this process of like, oh, I know what that is, I can identify it, I expect it, it's not that bad, we're still going. And I just kept doing that until I got all the way off, like notating this stuff. Yep. We know that. We know that. We know that. We know how to get over that. We know how to implement this. We know a wellness technique. And I'm just one after another targeting all these different crappy states of consciousness and addressing them with the tools that I needed to do. Different diet, this is histamine intolerance, this is blah, blah. And as I'm going through using all my research and everything, we were able to guide ourselves to a point where we actually got off and we stabilized. But there was something left when I got there. And the only thing that I can find on the internet about it, and I still don't know if anyone even knows what this is a concept called superpositional state consciousness. And this is what sparked the video. When you have schizophrenia, a lot of times you'll experience things that you think are the past, or you think are the future, or something that's currently in your reality that doesn't seem explainable, that's again like a dream, or something that would be in a dream, or something that would be in a nightmare. And that's why over time I came to the conclusion that schizophrenia is like a prolonged state of Charles Bonnet syndrome, which is basically a progressive state of dementia, right? So I think what can happen to the brain is when there's too much exogenous stress factors, it essentially shuts down, right? And this shutting down process is like protective, right? Like, this comes back to the freeze, flight, fight, right? But no matter like what, your brain is essentially still shutting down, right? It's shutting down things that it doesn't need, so it only organizes the things it does need for the circumstance that it finds itself in. Now, sometimes, depending on a person's personal experience with a particular stimuli or whatever, it may choose the wrong one, right? And everybody has kind of with their default mode network, they have some kind of obviously default response to exactly how they're going to react to not just individual circumstances, but collectively, like in general, almost any of things that could be traumatic or concerning, right? So some people are, they're going to freeze. Some people are going to run. Some people, that's flight, and some people are going to fight. And so, in general, each person's going to respond, one of those ways in most circumstances by default, just because of how their default mode network is different from the people around them. But at the same time, you're going to kind of choose, your brain's going to choose in this circumstance what it needs to do because it's built to do that. If you push your brain far enough, like we often do in the military, we kind of have learned as humans how to train people to just push through all of those and kind of not react to them in that way, and to just keep as much of the brain on and functional to make logical decisions as possible, while transmuting the stress of the circumstance. And this is important because this comes back to this conference and why this made me think about superpositional state consciousness, because I was thinking about this, then I was observing what people were doing, and then I was seeing how they didn't understand their environment, and they're still repeating, stigmas and things that they should be, experienced in. And this video is all over the place. I wanted it to be a little bit more organized. But it was almost like when I got off this medicine, I went from being dull as fuck, like not able to really process my reality, getting up and doing just the basic things every day because I'm on an animal tranquilizer, to all of a sudden I'm not experiencing just like kind of what I think is my free will. I'm experiencing like one predefined version of reality uh, that is superpositional in nature. Uh, like the past and the future and the present all together. And this made me wonder, like what consciousness actually is. Because again, we're experiencing our realities when it's not modified by somebody else. Like when your life isn't being modified by an outside force, dictated by things that are outside of your control, uh, and you're just freely making the decisions that you need to make for yourself. It seems like you have all the free will to just do whatever you want. You have the actual free will. And that there is no past and there is no present and there is no future. So I'm going to make a part 2 and we're going to talk about how I don't think that's true.